And we're back for the second part of our special edition of the Front Page here on GNAT TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal, along with our three of our area legislators, Tim Goodwin, Jeff Wilson, Cynthia Browning. And thank you all for coming back. In the first half of our segment, we talked a little bit about two big ticket items that are under discussion at the legislature so far, single-payer health care and education spending. Let's go to a few of the others that seem to be bubbling up there under the radar screen as well. Well, not so much under the radar, but right out in front of the center. And one of them that's gotten a lot of press anyway seems to be this issue of paid sick leave. And I guess, again, Cynthia, let's go to you first. Can you explain exactly what's involved with that and how the legislature is attempting to craft some kind of a solution for this perceived problem?
Sure. The issue is primarily that there are some jobs where if you get sick, you can have a sick day off and you still get paid. But there are other jobs in which that is not one of the benefits provided. Mm-hmm. And so I think that many people are justifiably concerned that this means that employees go to work when they are sick because they can't afford to lose the pay, or they can't stay home to take care of a sick child because, again, they can't afford to lose that pay. Mm-hmm. So that is a very legitimate concern. It's an issue of family health. It's an issue of public health because if people go to the work sick, they can spread the disease.
Right.
Many companies already provide this benefit in one form or another, but there are also many that do not. And in many cases, I think they cannot afford to do that. So there's some in the legislature that want to mandate that every company, for every position, provide what they are calling earned sick time. And that means for every 30 hours you work, you get an hour of paid time off. And it's supposed to be for sick time, but whether you could require or monitor that, I don't know. And you could accumulate up to 7 days worth of that paid time off per year. And initial versions of the bill had it for everybody, part-time, seasonal, everything. Later versions may be going more towards just full-time. So it is an important issue in terms of public health. It's an important family issue. The question is it really something that the state should be reaching down and putting its hands on businesses that have not chosen to do this and say, you have to do this? Mm-hmm. Is it really the business's responsibility? They may like to do this and they just can't afford it.
Right.
So I myself have been opposed to the earlier versions of this bill. I would like to see, I don't think anything needs to be done. I think we need to leave this to businesses to do it when they can, if they want to. I'm particularly concerned about trying to require it for part-time or seasonal, and I think it should only be possible after you've been working somewhere for a while so that you've really earned it. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of really important issues. It's a question of, is this the right way to get at the problem? And I know I've worked in small businesses in Vermont, and there's no way they could do this. They could, remember, this would mean that you would have to pay the person who was home sick, and then either their work doesn't get done, or you have to pay someone to take their shift. So you got a double payment. You know, if two of your employees do it in the same month, you can't make your payroll. So I just don't want the state to do this.
I would imagine there's probably been some pushback from business and industry groups saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't afford this. Particularly small businesses, I would think, would be particularly affected. Has that been?
Yes, that is the case.
That is the case so far?
But there's also a very strong push, a very emotional push about, you know, people shouldn't go to work when they're sick. And I agree with that. It's just that I've been in these jobs, and I took responsibility when I was sick to stay home because I was sick. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, where does the risk and the responsibility and the cost lie? Where can it fairly lie? And I don't think they've figured out the right balance.
Is there any chance the legislature is going to pass a bill this year deciding whether or not they're going to have to pay for that time, or is that going to be one of these bills that sort of dies a slow death someplace in a committee somewhere?
I think it's too early to tell, but I think conceivably it may not wend its way through to the signature. We'll see. The Housing and Military General Affairs Committee is still taking testimony here that it may, when they're done, it may be referred to appropriations, and conceivably that the bill may die in appropriations. But I think it's a little too early to tell. I imagine the leadership's considering various different moves on this, but there is initially there was a number of folks who were contacting me in support of it, but lately there's been a groundswell of opposition from a number of businesses in the Chamber of Commerce, our local Chamber of Commerce, and a number of small business people and restaurants. And I agree with Cynthia that I think philosophically it's a bit of an overreach, but also from a pragmatic point of view. I'm concerned that we're already harnessed in Vermont with this anti-business image. And we live in the reality that we do have surrounding states, New York, Massachusetts, especially New Hampshire, that we have to compete with. And I think this would be a bad time to try to pursue legislation of this sort.
Just out of curiosity, where's the governor landing on this question? Because it strikes me, just as we're sitting here talking, he's been, I guess, come under some criticism from some groups, labor union groups that ostensibly would be his allies, political allies.
Right.
This seems like a very convenient place for him to kind of curry some favor with those folks. He's asking them to make some sacrifices in the interest of balancing the budget and making compromises to assist in the state's competitiveness. Has he been kind of pushing to say, hey guys, why don't we come up and craft some kind of a deal on paid sick leave so I can take them to those folks and say, hey, I delivered for you? Has that been the message?
Non-committal.
He has been.
At least in public. I don't know what he's doing in private.
Right. He hasn't taken, my understanding is he's not taken a stance on this particular issue at this point in time.
That's my understanding as
Okay.
well.
It just struck me as I was listening to you. This would be an opportunity here for him to jump in.
Well, he may not see that way.
Maybe I'm thinking too hard here. Well, one area where the governor has been very vocal about and got national attention for in his State of the State speech, as probably everyone knows by now, is his discussion of the heroin epidemic. He believes is sweeping the state, and certainly there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's a much bigger problem today than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago or at some point in the past. And that's prompted a lot of discussion around what the state is planning to do to remedy that. And Tim, let me turn to you. Do you sense or see happening any tangible action by the legislature to address some of the concerns the governor spoke about in his State of the State message? Or again, is that just one of these really big subjects that's simply going to take a while to digest and move through the system?
No, we started in it passed out of the Judiciary Committee and subsequently passed the House, passed its, it was H-65, which is a Good Samaritan bill. The Good Samaritan bill basically granted immunity to a person who called rescue, use a colloquial term, when somebody was laying on the floor in danger of dying of a drug overdose, most commonly heroin probably. And I was, in the Judiciary Committee, we listened to a lot of testimony. We listened to police. We listened to healthcare providers. We listened to addicts. It's pretty impressive when you sit and you have a couple of people who are addicts, and these people happen to be people who were successfully staying away from it. I'd say recovering, but they themselves would say we're addicts. So you can exercise a lot of discipline, but you don't really recover. It's kind of a tough thing to listen to. So we started with that. I think that now every ambulance, I think the state troopers now are carrying
Narcan.
Thank you.
What's Narcan?
Anyway, it's you can take it.
Oh, okay.
Breathe it, sniff it through your nostril, and it'll. What happens when you get a heroin overdose is you stop breathing. And what happens when you sniff some Narcan is that it turns that around in a hurry.
Okay.
So it saves lives. And when we got back, this session, I sat and listened to a couple of people from I should be able to remember the name of it, but I don't right now. If anybody, it's a service place in Burlington for people with addiction problems, and they told us about a couple of people whose lives have been saved because of that legislation, and that makes you feel pretty good. Now there's obviously it's ongoing because the governor's speech said we're gonna spend more money that way. We're gonna have more facilities, like the one in Burlington. I think we have 4 or 5 of them, I think, in the state now, but the one in Burlington's probably the one that stands out. And I don't think it's any choice, actually. I think the governor's right. I read the Rutland Herald this morning, and it pointed out that Maine and New Hampshire are on the same. Well, I guess Maine's on a slightly different track. They're on the track that we listen to law enforcement officers, among others from Massachusetts, and they said, you can't arrest your way out of this. It sounds as if Maine might be leaning a little bit in the direction of trying to arrest your way out of it. I don't know. We'll see how that works.
Well, one of the issues that I've felt about this for a while anyway, and I know many others have as well, is that down here in Bennington County, the treatment options are pretty limited. It seems like you have to, I guess the nearest facility, someone who would need help overcoming an addiction problem would be in Rutland, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a fairly new facility.
I think it is right now.
What is there any sense that we're going to be seeing some money, I guess, flow down this direction to provide some options for folks that may need that help?
I think that's a really important issue because we know that Bennington County does have a drug problem and we don't have good treatment options. At some point we may get something like that, but remember it requires having a hospital or clinic that wants to do that and can qualify for do that, and it's not an easy thing to do. But I think another thing people should be aware of is there's something called early intervention, and that means suppose someone is arrested for something relatively minor and it turns out clearly they have a drug issue. Instead of prosecuting them and putting them in jail for the misdemeanor, you divert them into treatment so that then they can get their life together and maybe they never enter the criminal justice system at all. So that's a very, very vague, easy, short way of saying it. But we want to provide options of treatment. We want to be sure that people that come in contact with law enforcement or the judicial system are aware of their options, and at that point when they're kind of hitting bottom, they just got arrested, that might be a time when they're willing to look at things they might not be willing to look at in other circumstances. But I also think that there's a kind of a mismatch between some of the different counties. In Benedict County, we tend to be kind of strict on crime, tough on crime. In Chittenden County, if they put as many people in jail as we do, we couldn't hold them. I mean, they just kind of let things slide that we arrest. And so I feel there's a little bit of a tendency for Chittenden County to say, you need to do things the way we do. And hey, we elect our state's attorney, and she represents the people. So I'm a little bit nervous about exactly how this is going to work out. Bennington County needs treatment options, and it needs this kind of diversion from prison sort of thing. Drug court, if people are familiar with that. But it also needs to be done in a way that makes sense in terms of our community values. Because I know that my neighbors they want people to take responsibility for their own actions. And I know the governor is trying to make a point to lessen the stigma of drug addiction, to make it easier for people to get treatment, and I support that. But at some point early on in your trajectory, as an addict, you had to choose to take the stuff. And maybe at some point it's a disease, it's a compulsion, you can't control it. But early on, you made some choices. And I think people need to take responsibility for that. And I think many people in Bennington County feel that way as well. I mean, this whole thing about fentanyl, that there's this fentanyl that people are taking thinking it's heroin and it's incredibly powerful. And Dr. Chen is saying, be very careful about anything. If you don't know what it is, don't take. And I'm sort of like, just don't take it at all. Don't worry about fentanyl. Just don't take heroin. You know, I mean, what, have the Narcan on hand. No, wait, just don't take it at all. You know, it's like, so I kind of feel like in our effort to lessen the stigma and get everybody to get treatment, we're kind of losing sight of the fact that this is not a disease like catching flu. You choose it. So just don't.
Right. Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing much more about it. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's getting a lot more national attention. I mean, the governor's speech was widely picked up on by a number of national news media outlets, and I'm sure somewhat to the discomfiture of some Chamber of Commerce executives who rather people think of Vermont as a land of covered bridges and ski slopes and maple trees. And
yeah, I think he
whatnot,
exaggerated the problem and he exaggerated our ability to solve it, but that would be neat.
Well, then that's we'll stay tuned, I guess, as the saying goes. Well, Cynthia, we'll stick with you for here for a second because I know there's one issue that's also kind of come back, I guess you could say, that we thought, well, I guess most of you all thought you had dealt with, and that's the question of campaign finance reform. It came up early in the session, was passed, I think, by fairly wide margins in both the House and the Senate. However, a drafting error, I guess, crept into the writing of the bill, which now has opened the door to, I guess, the need for another vote on this bill. And I gather you are going to take advantage of this opportunity, Cynthia, to
yes, sir.
to air out this question a little bit further. I mean, what's the problem with the bill that was passed?
Okay, we passed the campaign finance bills in both houses last session, and then there was a conference committee to reconcile the differences. And at the beginning of this session, the conference committee popped out a report that basically increased all the limits even beyond what was in the earlier versions of the bill. So in other words, the limits were higher than the limits in either the House or Senate version, and they kept having these unlimited contributions. They're like, if the PACs can take unlimited contributions, we want the parties to be able to take unlimited contributions and then make unlimited contributions to party candidates. So that's a lot of lack of limits. So there wasn't a lot of limits in there, or at least not enough for my purposes. So, no, this is important. The Committee of Conference report is just up or down. Mm-hmm. You can't amend it. It went through. Then, because they were jamming it through before people could oppose it, they found a drafting error. So they have to fix that drafting error in a separate bill. And so that gives me an opportunity to offer an amendment, not just fixing the drafting area, but putting some limits back in. And I seen my opportunity and I took it. So I don't like unlimited contributions. Okay. I don't think you can get into a money arms race with PACs. The Supreme Court has made decisions. There's not a lot we can regulate, but there are some things we can regulate. And I think there should be limits on what the contributions, wherever we can limit contributions, we should have some sort of limit. 40,000, 10,000, it could be a high limit, but we gotta have some limits. And so I will have a couple of amendments that will try to put them back in. It's important for people to understand by the time they see this, this may all be over with, because leadership will most likely say that my amendments are not germane, which means these guys will never have a chance to vote on them. But I'm gonna put it out there again because the Democrats like to talk a big game about being for campaign finance reform and fighting money in politics. If you're gonna say you have those principles, at some point, you actually have to live up to them. And I don't think they did that in this campaign finance reform bill.
Gentlemen, your comments? Do you feel like that bill needs fixing also?
I'm the odd person here because I'm an independent. And that means I don't have a party.
Right.
Oh,
and
right. You don't have a PAC that's
I don't have a party. No, not a PAC. Party. I don't have a party. And if I'm not mistaken, you can get $4,000 from the party for a candidate?
No, you can get unlimited contributions from your party.
From the party?
Yes. So this bill makes it way harder for independents. It makes it harder for challenges.
And the individual cap's $1,000, right?
Per individual for a candidate.
So
yes.
I like Cynthia's attitude here. You know, I've been really I've been hurt by my friends on the Democrat and Republican side. They just seemed not to be very sympathetic for us independents in this
Wasn't one
legislation.
of the good parts of this bill that there was a bill setting some definitions at all? I mean, I gather before this bill passed, there kind of was we were in this void where
Right.
there was no real defining rules at all. I mean, isn't this at least a step forward to getting us sort of towards where we want to go?
I think that's what the committee thought, because there was a void. I guess the former law was struck down, and there's been rulings on the U.S. level, federal level, relative to PACs and our inability, I guess, to regulate PACs the way I'd like to see them regulated. But you know, I sympathize with Cynthia from the perspective that I think there should be limits. I've never taken any money from PACs, never taken any money from the party, and never taken any money from a corporation. So from where I sit, you know, less money in the political game, the better. I think there's just too much money. I think, especially nationwide, not so much in Vermont, but especially nationwide. But so I like to set an example that we have as minimal, as modest limits as possible. But as far as the amounts go. But we'll see what Cynthia's amendments look like, and I'm sure it'll be a great discussion, and hopefully we'll get to vote on them. But conceivably, she might be short-circuited by a ruling calling them out of order.
But I'm developing sequential options.
There you go. All right.
This discussion,
Stay tuned.
Yeah, indeed. This discussion reminds me of one other thought I had a few years ago, actually, during the Douglas administration, which was, speaking of fundraising and campaign finance, why is Vermont one of the last states in the country to have a governorship that only has a 2-year term? I mean, one would think that if one wanted to take money out of politics, to some degree, you would then have a 4-year term for the state's highest executive officer. Instead, every 2 years, I realize Governor Shumlin this year anyway, but maybe not have a very difficult time getting reelected. But in a typical year, you would have you know, two parties duking it out, slugging it out, raising lots of money to try and get their message out. And why do we need to go through that every 2 years? Why can't we have a 4-year term where a governor has an opportunity to kind of, you know, work on their vision of where they want to see the state go, and not have to worry about, you know, going out and rattling the money tree every 18 months or so?
I wish we did. I mean, I think this 2-year thing is a real problem from a variety of different perspectives. We tried to amend the Constitution, God, I want to say 20 years ago or so. I can't recall offhand. One of the issues is that it's a constitutional requirement that it's every 2 years, and the Vermont Constitution is relatively hard to amend. It has to, you know, the Senate has to vote on it and go through this process, and eventually the voters vote on it. But I think going to 4 years makes all the sense in the world, because one of the problems is, you know, you've got really the governor 1 year of governing and 1 year of politicking, essentially, and I think we'd be better off as far as more courageous decision making and leadership and futuristic thinking if there was a 4-year term. So I think it's a real problem. It's held us back from long-term thinking and better planning and more decisive leadership. But I don't see it changing anytime soon, because it's just such a difficult road to get it changed, and I don't think the Senate's interested at this stage, from what I gather, in even engaging in that conversation.
I think that I would be willing to have that conversation and discuss it, but I don't think you want to think that it's some sort of perfect solution, because remember, we don't defeat incumbents very often. It's not like it's very hard for an incumbent governor to get reelected. I mean, it's been a long time since we did that. So, you know, I think Jeff's got points, but you also need to understand that there's a balance of power between the legislature and the governor, and you're asking the legislature to give the governor more power. Setting aside any particular governors, is it really rational to expect the legislature to do that in the name of possible future thinking and benefits? I think the real problem, the real reason we've had lack of leadership, is that we haven't had the right kind of people in the governorship, and this governor, in fact, has not lacked bold vision. It's just he has no capacity to realize his vision, as in single payer. So, you know, it's a question of the personnel, not the structure of the office, in my opinion. You could have a 4-year, and you could be stuck with the same person for 4 years.
Maybe the dynamic would change if the legislature's terms were for 4 years.
Isn't that? I'm kind of junior in this environment, but it was my impression that that's that would be another complication. Is that, you know, if the governor is going to get 4 years, then what should the Senate get? What should the
Oh, the Senate would get 4 years, and we would still have 2 years. You could just see that right coming. So that's one reason why it may not go anywhere.
Non-starter right there, huh?
Yeah, I don't think that discussion's even happening, unfortunately. I think it's an important discussion to have. People find it, and there's difference of opinion, obviously, about it. But,
and what do you want to spend your time on? There's a limited amount of legislative time. If something doesn't have real legs and possibilities, should we spend time talking about it when we got, let's see, all this other stuff that...
Yeah, we do that all the time.
We have about 2 minutes left, so let me just go quickly around the table with you all, and just I'll ask each of you to give me 1 or 2 issues that you feel is important that you'd like to see the legislature take up this year at some point. Tim, let's start with you. Or 1 or 2 issues, other than the ones we've discussed here today so far, that you feel are, you know, really front burner.
Well, we have it. I've heard from a few constituents the legislation that's being worked on for involuntary administration of drugs or admittance into a healthcare facility. That's pretty contentious issue, and I think it's an important issue. I favor that bill. I know people who have health problems of that nature, and I know that should they slack a little bit in their discipline, they get beyond a point where they think that they really don't need any help, and it can be a family problem and a health services professional problem to get them back where they need to be. So,
Jeff, any other issues that we haven't talked about yet that you feel are right up there?
Well, one issue coming into the session, and time is short, is the budget. That's a huge issue every year, and whether we say we always balance it, but I question that sometimes because we're using one-time money year in and year out to actually bring it into balance. I'd like to try to develop a more sustainable budget process and budget itself, so we don't have to depend on these one-time monies. A more disciplined approach. And I was shocked actually that the governor was able to put the budget together and actually expand it to some degree.
I think a lot of people were.
Yeah.
Smoke and mirrors, baby.
But yeah, I had a column on this, I guess last week or the week before, that wondered about is it real or not, you know? And some would say, some were skeptical that it's smoke and mirrors, but I think whether it is or not, I'd like to see us have a more sustainable, disciplined process going forward.
Cynthia, get the last word.
And one way to get that would be My Bill H-207, which requires us to list actual budget expenditures, tax expenditures, and capital bill expenditures, so that you have an overview of how the government is allocating all of its different kinds of resources. And the House Appropriations Committee is actually interested in this bill, because I'm not asking for any particular changes. I'm just saying we're not looking at everything we're doing in the same place. So we have a tax credit for housing. Shouldn't we at least be aware of that when we're looking at what we spend for housing? So it's my understanding that she's actually asking the administration how hard it would be for them to do that. I anticipate they'll come back and say we can't do it, and then I will do it myself. But stay tuned.
Okay. Well, there you have it, and that's all we have time for today. But thank you all for watching. Thank you all, Cynthia Browning, Jeff Wilson, Tim Goodwin, for being our guests today on the front page. My name is Andrew McKeever. It's been a pleasure being with you today. Look forward to seeing you the next time. Have a good day.